Well, folks, we have some huge news out of the Senate race in Georgia in 2026. Congresswoman and fierce Trump ally Marjorie Taylor Greene has announced that she will not run for the U.S. Senate in 2026. She was reportedly mulling a bid against the very, very vulnerable Democrat Senator Jon Ossoff. He is considered by most to be the most vulnerable senator up for re-election in 2026. Now, this move strengthens the Republicans' chance to flip Georgia's Senate seat, and it really opens the opportunity for a strong Republican candidate to win the nomination in 2026 and go up against Jon Ossoff. As of the recent polls, the Congresswoman was leading in the primary polls, but was getting absolutely destroyed in the general election polls. Here was a recent poll right here that you saw. This was I believe it was on April 5th through the 24th, it was conducted. Brian Kemp, obviously, we know he is not running for Senate in 2026, but he was the only Republican candidate, who was beating Jon Ossoff in a head-to-head matchup. He was leading Ossoff by 3 percentage points. Marjorie Taylor Greene was losing to Jon Ossoff by 17 points. And you want to know what the funny thing? In this poll here, there was roughly 10% of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 that were going to vote for Jon Ossoff in 2026. Roughly 65% of independents said that they would support Jon Ossoff, while only about 26 said they would support Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, ultimately, I'm not going to sit here and say one poll is correct, but if most polls are trending in that direction, look, I think there was a clear bias when it comes to Donald Trump in polling in 24, in 2020, and 2016. No doubt about it. There was a clear bias against Donald Trump. The reality is when you looked at the state-to-state elections, they were actually pretty accurate. There were some that were off, but ultimately, most of them were in the general ballpark of where they should be. At the presidential level, it was very much off. But if you look down ballot, congressional races, Senate races, governor's races, you saw a very different story. It was very clearly the bias was against Donald Trump in these polls. But you really have to ask yourself, why was this decision? Why does it matter? Why is it such a big deal? Well, simply, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a very polarizing figure. Like we said, she's a fierce Trump ally with a loyal base in Northwest Georgia. She currently represents Georgia's 14th congressional district. She's an unapologetic conservative. Her style is she energizes the MAGA base. But it's no secret that her rhetoric has worried many, many GOP strategists. In a purple state like Georgia, remember, this is a state that voted for Donald Trump by only 2 percentage points, voted for Biden by a quarter, and it voted for Trump by 5 points back in 2016. This is a purple state. This is not 2000 anymore. This is not 2004 anymore, where you're voting for George Bush, the Republican, by 16.5 points. That is not the reality anymore. Georgia is a purple state where elections are razor thin, and a polarizing candidate will risk alienating moderates and independents, which are very much needed to win statewide. One example you can look at the suburbs around Atlanta. 2004, the Democrats are winning 3 counties, DeKalb County, Fulton County, and Clayton County. Fast forward to 2024, not only are they winning Clayton, DeKalb, and Fulton, they're winning Douglas County, Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Rockdale County, Newton County, Henry County. They're winning so many more. Look at this. Go back to 2004. These are Republican strongholds. Very, very Republican strongholds. That the reality is the population around Atlanta has expanded and has become very, very liberal. And now Jon Ossoff won this Senate seat in 2021 by less than 2 percentage points. This was a very close election in the Senate. Extremely close election. Ultimately, we know he won it by about a percentage point, less than 2 percentage points, but in the initial election, he actually lost the popular vote. The only reason there was a runoff election was because David Perdue did not hit the 50% threshold needed to not invoke a runoff. But ultimately, after this election, he pulled out and was able to win 50% of the vote in this election. Remember, fast forward to 2022. Raphael Warnock ended up winning re-election in a year that was supposed to be very good for Republicans. It was supposed to be very, very good for them. Nope, it wasn't. Not in the Senate. Democrats flipped. They flipped the Pennsylvania Senate seat. They held on to Mark Kelly's seat in Arizona, and they held on to the seat in Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto, against Adam Laxalt. Now, you ask why? Why? Candidate quality matters. In the same election where you had Herschel Walker running against Raphael Warnock, Warnock won by 3 percentage points. In this same election, you saw that Governor Brian Kemp won re-election by 7.5 percentage points. It was just insane. A very, very big difference. You saw here, look at this. Tony Evers from Wisconsin won by 3.5 percentage points. While at the same time, Ron Johnson, who was not seen as the greatest candidate, which he was the incumbent senator, won by a percentage point. When you have good candidate quality, that matters. It seriously matters. These close races show Georgia is a battleground state where every vote counts. And a diverse nominee, or I shouldn't say diverse, a divisive nominee could hand Democrats this race. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene came out in a post and she said it herself. She came out and said it herself. She said that she's not going to run because the Senate is, quote, where good ideas go to die, and criticized GOP leaders in the Senate for undermining Donald Trump's agenda. She also called out the National Republican Senatorial Committee for pushing polls that she claimed downplayed her electability, which that's kind of a joke. That's not the argument. If I was Marjorie Taylor Greene, I would not start saying that they were downplaying her electability. If anything, they were doing the exact opposite of downplaying her electability. While Marjorie Taylor Greene's frustration with the establishment resonates with many conservatives, her decision to stay on the sidelines, it creates a clear path for a broader GOP appeal. Because with her withdrawal, it avoids a potentially bruising primary, increases the odds of nominating a candidate who can actually unite the party and win in 2026. Remember, look at this right here. Donald Trump, when he won the state of Georgia, this is something very interesting. Marjorie Taylor Greene, although she won this election, very easily a Republican stronghold, she won it by 28 percentage points. If you look at the actual county level, she ran behind Donald Trump in some counties by up to 10 percentage points. Look at this right here. Look at Dade County. Trump won this by 66 percentage points in Dade County. You look, Marjorie Taylor Greene in Dade County. She only won it by 57 percentage points. Almost ran behind Donald Trump by 9 percentage points. Look right here. Chattooga County. Greene won it by 52 percentage points, while Donald Trump won it by 64. She won it by 52. Trump ran ahead of her by 12 percentage points. Look, in Murray County, she won by 63 percentage points. Donald Trump won by 71 percentage points. She clearly, in some of the most conservative counties in America, still ran behind Donald Trump. That is an issue. That is a major issue if you were Marjorie Taylor Greene. So don't try and feed me this BS that you were downplaying her electability. You ran behind Donald Trump in one of the most conservative Republican counties in America, in one of the most conservative Republican districts in America. You may have grassroots support. You may be a big fundraiser for the base. But the reality of winning in a purple state is just not that. Do not pull another Herschel Walker, because the reality is with a good, solid candidate, someone like a David Perdue would not have lost this election in 2022. Herschel Walker should not have been the nominee. The only reason he was the nominee was because Donald Trump gave him the endorsement. That is the only reason. But now, with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Brian Kemp, who also decided he was not going to run, which is really unfortunate, because he was seen as the most formidable candidate to win this election. With both of them out of the race now, the Republican primary is a blank slate at this point. It truly is. This opens the door for a battle-tested conservative who can appeal to both the MAGA voters and moderates in the state. So there's a number of different people you're looking at who could be running right now. As of now, Buddy Carter and John King are both in the races as of right now. Buddy Carter represents the 1st Congressional District. John King represents is the Georgia Insurance Commissioner. I think John King could be a good candidate. He actually ran ahead of Brian Kemp, and I'm just going to see if they have his, they don't have his elections in here. But he did run ahead of Brian Kemp in 2022 when Kemp won by 7 percentage points. He actually ran ahead of Brian Kemp in that election. I think that is very much something to look forward to. You need to find someone who can run. The issue is there's also an open governor's race, which the current EG who is running in the governor's race was seen as really behind Kemp, was seen as the best candidate to win statewide. Ultimately, he's not going to run in the Senate, but you have many other candidates who could potentially run in this race here. People like Mike Hollins, Tyler Harper, who's the agricultural commissioner, Rich McCormick, Doug Collins, Brian Jack. Now, there's been some speculation around Brian Jack. He is a newly elected representative. He is in Georgia's 3rd congressional district. He replaced a retiring Republican congressman. And supposedly, there's been some talks behind the scenes that this is Donald Trump's pick to replace, to run in this race is Congressman Brian Jack. Brian Jack was on Trump's 2024 re-election campaign, and he worked in the White House from 2019 to 2021. Now, unlike Greene, a Greene-led primary, which would have really split the party between the more MAGA base and establishment factions of the party. But this group of Republicans will now allow them to rally behind a candidate who really balances conservative principles with electability. That is the big thing. We need electability in this race. When you have a candidate with $11 million cash on hand for the Democrats, and the Democrats are going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in this race, you need to make sure that you have a candidate, a strong candidate, who can fundraise well and has broad appeal in the state. Don't sit here and try and give them the policy litmus test. We need a Republican who can get elected. That's what you need. And polls suggest that any strong Republican could challenge Jon Ossoff, because as of right now, I still has this as a toss-up state. Especially with Trump's victory in 2024 in Georgia, it boosts the GOP momentum in this race here. Now, Trump's endorsement will most likely shape the race. It'll shape the primary, and his support could unify the base and ensure that the nominee has the resources they need to compete in a general election. It could avoid a really bruising primary process. And Greene's decision to step aside really avoids a scenario where Trump's loyalty to her may complicate the ability to back a more electable candidate, someone who actually has electability behind them statewide, not in just a county where you still ran behind Donald Trump in. Because the reality is you have a very vulnerable Democrat in Jon Ossoff. Like we said, he has had to walk on a tightrope criticizing Donald Trump, and now he's trying to be this bipartisan senator, but also calling for impeachments of Donald Trump, which I think that could really backfire on him. Look how impeachment backfired on the Democrats in 2019. February 2019 was just a great time for Donald Trump. That's when things were great. 2019 was a great year for Donald Trump. You got through the Russia, the hoaxes, the witch hunts. You got through it all. And that is what you need again. And if that's what Jon Ossoff is trying to push down, good luck. Good luck. Because Georgia's shift in political landscape may favor the Democrats long term, but you're not there yet. Georgia focuses on the economy, border security concerns, cultural issues that align with Republican priorities. You can see Republicans can still win in the state. They can still win in the state when there was supposed to be a red wave. And then the red wave just really didn't show up anywhere. It showed up in like 2 or 3 places. The governor's level in Georgia and Florida, and then on the House side in California and New York, you saw the red wave. Outside of that, it really didn't exist. And you saw Kemp run ahead of Raphael Warnock by almost 10 percentage points. So a good, strong conservative Republican, like Brian Kemp on a policy basis, is one of the most conservative Republicans in America, hands down. Absolutely. And he won the state by 7.5 points. Just 2 years after Biden won the state by 11,000 votes. And voters are going to be frustrated with Democratic policies. Look at Jon Ossoff. There was a poll that was taken recently that showed that Jon Ossoff was neck and neck with a generic Republican. But when those voters or the people polled were told that he voted against, he opposed allowing women and girls in sports, all of a sudden the generic Republican was winning by almost 10 percentage points. That is something that the Republicans could absolutely push on. This could alienate socially many people from Georgia, 100% alienate them. And in a hypothetical matchup, as of right now, Ossoff, like we said, was leading Marjorie Taylor Greene by almost 17 percentage points. Now, there were other Republicans who were much closer, except Brian Kemp was actually leading. What a shame he's not running. But with Greene out, the GOP can 100% nominate someone who will perform better. You need someone who's going to perform among the independents and swing voters in places like Cobb County, Henry County, all these counties that we saw. Donald Trump, right here, places that used to be Republican strongholds. You need to really reduce the margin here. You cannot let Democrats run the margin up here. Places like Fulton County, Clayton County, DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, Douglas County, Newton County, Henry. These are places where you really need to blunt that Democrat margin. And you need to allow the rest of the state to really pour in and have these huge margins. You need to have huge Republican turnout statewide. You just do. And we know that higher turnout elections now perform better for the Republicans versus how it was, you could say, a number of years ago, where it favored Republicans when it was a low turnout matchup. Now, Republicans currently hold a 53-47 Senate majority, and flipping Jon Ossoff's seat is a huge priority for the GOP to control and advance Trump's agenda in the Senate. Obviously, tax cuts and border security are big things that they're trying to push through now, but in the second half of Donald Trump's term, they need the Senate. You need to be able to appoint judges, confirm judges. Like we said, right now, we still have this at a very good place for the Republicans. Because as of right now, I have the Democrats ceiling at 49 seats. So even if the Democrats win in all of these seats here, they're still only at 49 seats. But that's like a ceiling, and I just don't see them picking all these up. I don't see them picking Maine up to begin with. I don't see it. If you had to have me tell you exactly how I feel things are going to go, I'm going to say Michigan is going to be a slight Democrat advantage as of right now. Just because we don't know anything about North Carolina, I'm going to go it's a slight Republican advantage. And in Georgia, I'm going to say it's a slight Republican advantage as well. Obviously, a lot of details we need to find out in Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia really to see what's next. And Maine, I still think Susan Collins will win. I think it could be tight. But like I said, as of right here, I have it between 1 and 5 percentage points that she will win re-election. We're going to see ultimately what happens. But Georgia, it is the one of 2 seats where Donald Trump won in 2024, which a Democrat is up for re-election. That is what we're going to see here. You're going to see Republicans Republicans are going to spend millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in this state here to flip it. Because Jon Ossoff is the most vulnerable Democrat going into this election. So ultimately, Marjorie Taylor Greene's decision to not run for the Senate is a clear way for a strong electable conservative to take on Jon Ossoff in 2026. They have a good bench there. And with Trump's backing and a fired up base, the GOP 100% has the opportunity to flip this seat and strengthen the Senate majority. But that is going to wrap things up for today. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are you happy, excited, or sad that Marjorie Taylor Greene is not running in 2026? Who do you think the Republicans should nominate in 2026 to defeat Jon Ossoff? As always, drop down below, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And folks, we will catch you next time.